Start with Demetrius freaking Johnson, man. Win over Wilson Reis over the weekend. First man to submit Wilson Reis in nearly 30 pro fights for the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Title defense number 10 for DJ. I have some very strong opinions about this fighter that were only, I think, cemented and elevated by his performance this weekend. Kenny, flawless performance, and I guess my biggest takeaway is that here he is in title defense number 10, putting forward the best training camp and, in my mind, the best performance of the 10. Just an amazing effort from the flyweight champ over the weekend.
It just might be. I don't know if Wilson is the toughest competition out of those 10, but he certainly looked very good. I mean, Wilson has improved so much as a mixed martial arts fighter. I was training with him when he was outside of the UFC, and to see his development has been awesome. And obviously a very high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. But to see what he's done with his striking and how he's improved his wrestling and how he's put it all together has been fun to watch. But Demetrius Johnson just is at a different level, man. The fact that he can, switch his stances, he's so good at feinting. His clinch game is probably the best we have ever seen in the sport. Yes, even better than Anderson Silva. His submission game, his ability to pass guard like he does, his ground and pound. He just has so many freaking weapons, man. He's got a machine gun. Everyone else has kind of a pistol, and that's the difference. Demetrius Johnson is an absolute beast. Looked phenomenal, and it's dizzying when you see how he works, how he sets guys up. He's smarter than everyone. He's more technical than everyone. He has more weapons than everyone. Demetrius Johnson is the man.
I said on Fox over the weekend, it's like you prepare for this guy, as Wilson Reis did, under the guidance of guys like Eric Del Fierro and Dominic Cruz, who has fought and beaten the man, and you think you sort of have a beat on what he's going to do, and then you get in there with the guy, and it's just like, holy piss, There's nothing you can do, and I don't think there's anything any flyweight could have done this particular Saturday night. And this performance comes on the heels of a title defense against Tim Elliott that saw him get dropped, arguably, right? Yeah. Suffer a knockdown, have to fight off some very difficult submission attempts and deal with a lot of scrambles and such on the ground over 25 hard minutes, a title defense that a lot of people believe was his toughest to date. And now to see him put on this effort against Wilson Reis. I mean, I would agree with you, Kenny, that Wilson is not the most qualified of the guys that he's beaten. But would you agree with me in saying that as we try to put DJ into a historical context, that people tend to want to denigrate his competition when he's beaten Joseph Benavidez twice, he's beaten John Dodson twice, John Moraga's got some credentials, Kyoji Horiguchi is probably a top 3 flyweight right now. I mean, on and on it goes. To me, this guy's got a 60% finishing rate in his title defenses. As I mentioned, he's only getting better. And to me on this night, and I have some research to back it up, I believe Demetrius Johnson surpassed Jon Jones as the greatest UFC fighter of all time.
I wouldn't go that far. I would say that right now, Jon Jones is technically out of the picture. He is the best pound-for-pound fighter right now in the UFC. I do believe that. Is he the greatest of all time right now? No. I think consistency-wise, he will show that he will definitely prove that to be true as far as his title defenses. But again, that's my issue with it, is that the competition, when you compare it to guys like, let's say, a Jon Jones or George St. Pierre, is not at the same level. And again, I don't want to make this comparison at this level, but it's similar to when Ronda Rousey was dominating everybody. Now, is it that she's that much better than everybody, or that her competition just isn't up to par? There's not a whole lot of flyweights. When you look at all the different divisions, all right, and the amount of fighters, I think there's less flyweights than any other division, as far as I know. As far as the pros, which means that there's a smaller pool of fighters, and that's why I don't have Demetrius Johnson as a greatest of all time.
Yeah, I think flyweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight have the least amount of fighters, at least as far as the men are concerned. And for me, I've been arguing Jon Jones is the greatest of all time for years. Mm-hmm. I don't like the pound-for-pound discussion because to me it's unrealistic. Like what, DJ and Jon Jones, if they both weighed 200 pounds, right? Like sure, if you want to say DJ is the best pound-for-pound fighter in the sport right now, I don't think anyone's really arguing anyone else. And it's never a conversation, even back to MMA Live, Kenny, in 2008, that I've much cared for. All of that being said, I love the greatest of all time conversation. And even though, it's hard to put careers that are happening right now into proper context, because they're not done. I think it's a fun conversation to have. And for Jon Jones, for me, strength of schedule has been the heart of the argument. Certainly, there have been a lot of spectacular finishes along the way. 8 title defenses, 16 UFC wins. He's never really lost. But to me, it was really the fact that he was beating Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer along the way. You can say that 205 pounds lacks a little bit of depth right now, and I wouldn't argue with you at all when you look at guys like Volkan Oezdemir. I think are in the top 6 or 7 with 1 UFC win, right?
Yeah.
When Jones was doing it, he was taking out Shoguns and Rampages and Rashads and everybody else in spectacular fashion. But for Demetrius Johnson, I just feel like right now, based upon what he's been able to do to stay consistently active and be a reliable champion, and even winning rematches and finishing guys in a very skillful division, right? I think it's harder to finish guys at 25 than it is at 85 or 205 because, you can land one strike and it can be good night, whereas I just think that's harder to do. You need a trid of finishes, I think, more in this flyweight division. So for DJ now, it's 10 defenses, 6 finishes, 2 pro MMA losses. He's never been finished, and I think he's only getting better. So for me right now, I think DJ is the greatest mixed martial arts athlete and fighter of all time. I think Jon Jones, certainly Kenny, by the end of his career, could regain the throne as far as my personal opinion. I think it's important to say this is one man's opinion, right? So
right.
I tweeted out the GOAT emoji before Dana White suggested that maybe DJ's the greatest of all time. I'm not on Twitter calling these fights. I pushed out the tweet right after the fight because I really thought it after seeing that moment live and seeing that performance live that he was the guy. So for you, Kenny, forced to choose a greatest of all time today, Monday, April 17th. I mean, do you even like the conversation, and who is it for you?
I think it's a good conversation to have. For me, it is Jon Jones. When you look at his record, first of all, he's 22-1, and really, we all know it really is 23-0. And if you look at how long he was undefeated for, that match against Matt Hamill was in 2009. He started his career in 2008. So let's take that Matt Hamill fight out of the picture. If you do want to do it, you could say 2009. But anyways, he has been undefeated his whole career from 2008 to 2017. That is insane. Now let's look at the guys that he's faced. Former champion Rashad Evans, he beat him. Quentin Rampage Jackson, another former champion, he beat him. Another Pride and UFC champion, Shogun Hua, he beat him. Lyoto, another champion in the UFC, a guy who beat Rashad Evans. And this was when Lyoto was Lyoto, finishes Lyoto. And then Vitor Belfort, pre-USADA, Vitor Belfort, he finished him with a submission. Submitted the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Gustafsson, I think he trained maybe 10 days for that fight. He beat him in a 5-round war. Took care of Teixeira with ease. Then he beats future Hall of Famer Daniel Cormier, a guy who is going to be a legend himself. He beat him. So who's the current champion? So he's basically 23-0. He's undefeated from 2008 to 2017. That's a hard resume to beat.
You're right, and Cormier too, a guy who might end up, top 20 all time in terms of the greats. No, you set up a great case for Jon Jones, and again, I've had to make that argument for years, and I feel like I sort of entrusted him with that seat when Anderson Silva was the consensus guy. As far as Silva's concerned, I think we both can agree he has a strong case, Kenny. The recent performances hurt him. I think weird title defenses against guys like Talis Latis and Damian Maia hurt him a little bit. There's no denying, started 16-0 across all the UFC record books. I don't think either one of us would argue if someone made a case for Anderson Silva. And I think George St. Pierre has a strong case as well. My biggest knock on GSP, Kenny, last finish for him came against BJ Penn 8+ years ago. That was a corner stoppage, and that was his only finish in a UFC welterweight title defense. So for me, GSP's only real knock is that he hasn't put guys away. His last loss was 10 years and 10 days ago. So he hasn't lost since April 7th of 2007. Obviously, 4 years he hasn't fought. But do you think it's now a big 4? I mean, is it at least fair for me to inject DJ in there with Jones, Silva, and George St. Pierre? Am I forgetting anyone?
I have Demetrius. So I have the way I had it. I had Jon Jones at number 1. I have George St. Pierre at number 2. And then I have Demetrius Johnson at number 3. I have him above Anderson Silva. I have him above Fedor Emelianenko, for sure. I think when you look at the strength of schedule, Anderson Silva's strength of schedule wasn't so great. I think the top guys that Anderson Silva beat, Vitor Belfort, Forrest Griffin, Rich Franklin, Dan Henderson. Those are the biggest names. Damian Maia was a little bit different. It was at 185, but it's not the same Damian Maia, in my opinion, that he beat back when he did. So, and a couple of those matches the match against Forrest Griffin, that was at 205. So, that's how I have, man. So I have Demetrius Johnson at number 3, greatest of all time.
Well, either way, exciting times, man. I mean, you got all these guys neck and neck, 3 of the consensus greatest 4 of all time competing and potentially in prime form.
Yes.
We'll see what George St. Pierre does when he returns, but DJ and Jon Jones could jockey for this seat over the next half a decade, which is really cool to think about. And for Jon Jones, I guess my big question is, we've heard from his coaches for years that he's just scratching the surface and he's not showing any. I mean, he's barely showing you the wrinkles that Brandon Gibson and Mike Winkeljohn have put into his striking game. Part of that's inactivity. I mean, the reason in my mind that he lost the seat was because, at least for the last several months, he hasn't been able to make the walk for big fights and things like that. That's certainly a big part of it. But the question for me is, as Demetrius Johnson is unquestionably getting better now, can Jon Jones do that as well? Continue to peak and get better as a mixed martial artist? If so, I think he's got a great chance, at least in my mind, to regain that seat. We'll see what they do with DJ for title defense number 11. I think if Joseph Benavidez can get through Ben Wynn in New Zealand, I think that's the fight that makes the most sense for the record breaker for Demetrius Johnson.